How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today is the final preview video that I'm going to put up for the new set outside of the Commander stuff. So let's get to it with a card that I couldn't find a clean copy of originally, and that is Contagion Engine. For 6 colorless, it comes in, puts negative counter on each creature target player controls, and you can pay 4 and tap to proliferate twice. This was a missing piece to my Hapatra deck that I did in Historic Brawl, so this is going to bring this into Historic Brawl. It also brings the cost of the card down because right now it's ranging anywhere between $20 and $25, and it's a little expensive because it hasn't been reprinted in a while, so it's nice to see this as a good reprint. We're also going to see a copy of Mindbreak Trap, speaking of those reprints. And this is one I mentioned the other day, that archive trap. I was like, oh, it's too bad it wasn't this one because this one is like an $80 card. Well, here it is. This is also going to give us nice foil reprints for those who want to bling out their decks because that $80 price tag was just for the regular card. That didn't even count foils. So that's what happens when you only print it in one set over time. Now we also have a copy of, speaking of for blue decks, Commandeer. 7 mana, gain control of a target non-creature spell, and you can do new targets for it, but you can exile 2 blue cards instead of paying the 7. This is just a nice card to have to get rid of targeted removal, or it works really nicely for those spells that can't be countered, like an Abrupt Decay, which is actually part of this set too. So you can gain control of their spell and point it at something else rather than your thing. So that's a cool one to see. And then the last one I wanted to point out is not, such a big deal because it's been reprinted a lot recently, but it's nice to see it joining Swords to Plowshares in Historic Brawl and in Timeless and those other formats, and that is Path to Exile. 1 white, exile target creature. They get to put a basic land card from their deck onto the battlefield tapped. It's just a good removal spell, and it's nice to have a second version of the single mana exile spell coming to the client, and more copy of this is in the wild is a good thing because even though it's been reprinted a lot, it still has a pretty hefty price tag of around $5 to $6 a copy. So it's nice to get more of these out there and try to edge that down a little bit more and make us what's basically a staple card more affordable. So that does it for the breaking news cards. Now we're moving into the big score where they've revealed the rest of the big score cards coming out. And the top one that everybody's talking about is the guy on screen here. This is Loot, the Key to Everything for Teamer colors. It's a Beast Noble with Ward 1. It's a 1/2. Beginning of your upkeep, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of card types among non-land permanents you control, and you can play them this turn. So this is a big piece of the story that came out with the epilogue. This is what Vraska and Jay stole out of the vault in the story, and they're using it to travel to other planes. I'm not quite sure what the gist is, why they're doing it, but this thing, it's an okay card. The Ward 1's not really going to keep it protected. It can just get blown up by a shock for 2, essentially. And exiling the stuff, you have to play those cards or you're going to lose them for the rest of the game. So I'm not sure if there's a like Exile Matters type deck out there, because most of the time those are in red and white. This has no white in it. So, but we'll see what happens. Decent card. It's probably going to be popular just because it's cute. We'll see what happens. What isn't cute, however, is this card, Simulacrum Synthesizer, for 2 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, scry 2, and whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/0 construct artifact with power and toughness is +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So it's already a 1/1 for itself. It'll be a 2/2 if you have the synthesizer on the board. That's just the base stats. And then if you play it with a deck with like artifact creatures or other things, or you have ways of blinking your artifacts in and out of the battlefield, this thing can generate an army of these growing constructs, which can then be joined by things like Karn, who creates the constructs, the Thousand Moon Smithy, Urza High Lord Artificer. There's all kinds of things here. I kind of want to copy this to put into my Urza deck, the Precon from Brothers War that I got. It's sitting here unopened. This would be great to put in that deck, so I think I might pick up a copy for it. Then we're getting into the cards where they're trying to make functional reprints of reserved list. I can't talk right now. Cards. This is a Lotus Ring, 3 mana. It's an equipment, indestructible. The equipped creature gets +3/+3, has vigilance and tap. Sack the creature, add 3 mana of any one color, and it equips for 3. It's mana neutral, unfortunately. If you do it the turn that is, you're spending 3 to get 3, so it's kind of bad. But it's their best attempt at trying to get us a new version of Black Lotus. If there's a way to reduce the equipped cost down, you're actually going to end up being net positive on the mana, like Aster Bearer of Blades kind of comes to mind. So you can kind of try to move things around, or ways to free equip and move things around back and forth. There's some ways you can make this work, but I don't think this is gonna be that great. It's gonna start out expensive because it has Lotus in the name, and it'll come back down to earth and probably be like a $5 card eventually, so I would wait to pick this one up. Then we have a good reprint coming into Standard, and I think it also affects Pioneer because I think the original printing on this was prior to the Pioneer format being started. White, Grand Abolisher, 2/2, Human Cleric. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells, activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. The only thing that they can do is tap a land for mana and activate land abilities. That's it. So anybody's counterspell happy, tries to remove stuff off on your turn, they can't do it because this guy's going to be like, no. So he's really good. Was once upon a time a very expensive card because it was like a $30 card because it was only printed one time. Well, now it's been reprinted a few different times, including a secret lair. So the cost of this has already been brought down pretty reasonably, but it's nice to get more copies of it out there. Another nice card to have in the format for Standard is Rest in Peace, because graveyard decks are kind of becoming an in vogue thing. 1 and a white. When it enters, exile all graveyards, and if a card would be put there or a token, exile it instead. So this is just a great graveyard hate spell for sideboards. It's already on the Arena client, so we don't have to worry about that affecting Arena in them so much, but it's nice to see more of them out there. Then we have a card that everybody's calling the Infina Clue. It's the Esoteric Duplicator for 2 and a blue. It's an artifact clue that whenever you sack it or another artifact, pay 2, and if you do, create a copy of that artifact at the end of your turn. And then 2, sack it, it's draw a card, because it's a clue. So the neat thing here is you can pay 4, sack itself, draw a card, and then at the end of your turn, you're going to get a new copy of it. What's cool here, though, is if you're like me, you're going to put this in some color deck with like green or white where you can duplicate tokens, and then you're going to be able to make multiples of these every time you do this. So for 4 mana, you create it, and then it's going to create 2 copies of it at the end of the turn. And as there's multiples on the board of this thing, each one of them is going to have that pay 2 ability set up on its own. So then the next thing that gets, sacrificed, you can pay 2 for each copy of the duplicator on the board to make multiple copies. So you can kind of get exponential with things once you get rolling with this. So this is going to be a fun card to mess around with and see if I can break it. And speaking of things that can duplicate cards, this is Molten Duplication. For 1 and a red sorcery, create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, except for it's an artifact in addition to its other types, and it gains haste until end of turn. Sack it at the beginning of the next end step. So this is probably going to see a lot of play in Standard, maybe even Pioneer or Modern, as a way to give you a cheap duplicate copy of something on the board. I could see this like in a Phoenix deck, maybe, because you're copying like the Dragon's Rage Chandlers or the Phoenixes themselves to give you just a little extra push or give you an extra spell in the chain to get the Phoenixes out of the graveyard. I could see this in like the mono red deck win stuff in Standard. This also goes well in Commander with things that either duplicate tokens or that new Geared one where you can actually activate it and make a token copy of that. It also goes well with the next card that we're talking about here, and I will show this right now, and that is Worldwalker Helm for 2 and a blue. It's an artifact. If you would create 1 or more artifact tokens, instead create that many tokens plus an additional map. The token we create is an artifact, so you're going to get the map token trigger off of this. It also has an activated ability of 1 and a blue. Tap it, create a token copy of a target artifact token you control. So if you use the Molten Duplication to make a copy of something and then you pay 2 more, 1 and a blue, and tap this, you can make a permanent copy of that token with the Worldwalker Helm, and you'll get to keep that copy and not sacrifice it like you do the other ones, because it doesn't give the sacrifice ability to the token. It's just part of the spell resolution at the end of the turn. So this is going to be really fun, and you get the map tokens. This also goes hand in hand with the synthesizer, because then you're sacrificing map tokens, which then you can duplicate the map tokens. It also goes really well with some other cards that we're going to be looking at here in just a little bit, and I'll talk about those in a minute. For now, let's look at the next reserve list wannabe card, and that is Memory Vessel for 3 red. Artifact, taps, exile it. Each player exiles the top 7 cards of their library until your next turn. Players may play cards as that are exiled this way, but they can't play anything from their hand, and you can only activate it as a sorcery. But this has a couple different functions. This is a remake of Memory Jar. Now, I love Memory Jar. I actually own a copy of Memory Jar. I dug it up just to show you. Right here, this is my copy. I bought this for like $5 about 20 years ago. It's part of my Locust God deck that I'm actually currently remaking. That's why it's laying here. And it's a lot of fun. The difference here is you don't get to draw the cards off the Memory Vessel, though, like you do with the Memory Jar, so it's not going to work as well for that deck. However, the Memory Vessel allows you to actually lock your opponent's hands out for a full turn cycle because it's got to go all the way back around to you before they actually get to play anything that's in their hand. So this can actually act as, okay, I need an impulse draw, get a bunch of stuff and draw it. Or if you know your opponent has something nasty in their hand, or they just tutored for something and you know they're going to use it, you can bust this thing out and lock their hand for a full turn cycle. So it could be, 6, 7, 8 turns before they ever get to come back to what was in their hand to use when this is set off. So this is actually kind of interesting, and I can't wait to give it a try. Now, a card that I think is going to be a trap for those who are going to try it is Omen Path Journey for 3 and a green. Enters the battlefield, search your library for up to 5 land cards with different names, exile, then shuffle. At the beginning of your end step, choose a card at random, exile with Omen Path Journey, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, I'll go get my Nykthos, or I'll go get my Gaia's Cradles, or I'll go get my lands that, do the Discover things, or all these things that they could go and get, and someone's going to blow it up and they're going to lose those things. You need to play this in a very specific deck with something like Sterling Grove, which gives your enchantment Shroud, or something of that nature to keep this thing going, or a counterspell deck where you can play this and have counterspell mana available to keep them from blowing it up. The thing that people are really comparing this to, though, is Mana Severance. 1 and a blue, search for any number of lands in your deck, remove them from the game, and shuffle. The idea is you're set for mana, you don't need any more mana, you exile them out of your deck, and then you're just drawing gas the rest of the time. That's probably what Omen Path Journey's best function is going to be, especially in 60 card formats. However, you gotta be careful, because if you time this wrong, you could mana screw yourself, because yeah, you're drawing gas, but you may not have enough mana to keep going, and you're going to get locked up that way. So we'll see. I think this is kind of a trap card. It's probably not going to be worth a whole lot, except for it kind of has the cute art. I kind of want to get that for my daughter. Now we have a card that a lot of people are talking about, and that is Pest Control. White-black sorcery, destroy all non-land permanents with mana value 1 or less, and it cycles for 2. So the cool thing here is it blows up any tokens like treasures and maps and all that stuff. It blows up any 1-drops. It blows up 0-mana rocks like Mana Crypts. It also blows up things that are like lands that are activated on your turn. So say you swing at somebody, they block with a man land, and then you launch this, that man land explodes. So this is kind of cool. We'll see how good it is. I don't know how good Orzhov really is with this, but it's kind of fun to imagine. Then we have Collector's Cage. This is a hideaway mixed with a version of Coven, and I'll explain here in a second. 1 and a white, hideaway 5, look you top 5. You get to, exile 1, put it on the bottom in a random order. Then you can pay 1 and tap it, put a counter on a creature you control. And then if you control 3, this is the Coven part. Creatures with different powers, you get to play that exiled card without paying its mana cost. So this is neat. You get the free spell, and then you can actually sit there and go, okay, I'll put a counter on this. And you don't even have to have the card underneath of this anymore. You can just use it for 1 and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creatures, and it's cheap to do. So in a deck where you have +1/+1 counter synergies, you're going to be putting more than 1 counter on something. So this is kind of cool for those kind of decks. Then we have a remake of a banned card in Modern. This version is called Lost Jite. It's a colorless legendary artifact equipment. When it deals combat, the equipped creature deals combat damage, put a charge counter on the Jit. When you remove 1 from it, you untap a land, you put a target creature cannot block this turn, or put a +1/+1 counter on the equipped creature, and it equips for 1. And of course, that analog here is the banned Umezawa's Jite. 2 colorless. It's a legendary artifact equipment. When it deals combat damage, put 2 charge counters on it, and then you could either remove 1 to go +2/+2 to the equipped creature. Target creature gets -1/-1, or gain 2 life, and it equips for 2. So it halved all the stuff basically, but it kind of altered the stuff too. Like instead of gaining life, you get the untapped land. Instead of minusing, you could just make a creature not block, because that was the whole point. You'd hit something and then you'd kill it so it couldn't block later. Or you can put a counter on it, which is the +2/+2, which if you put it in a +1/+1 counters deck, you might get the +2 power out of it anyways. Scales up really nicely with Double Strike. And a lot of Modern players and where access to the Urza Saga artifact land is, they like this because it can search up a copy of this, unlike the GTA, which is banned in their formats, but it wouldn't be searchable with that anyways, even if it was still around. So this one is either going to be really good and it's going to get expensive for those formats, depending on where it lands, or it might just be a nice novelty callback to Umezawa's Jite. We'll see. And then the last card is a 4-mana 5/5 Trampler, Bristle Bud Farmer for 2 green, plant druid with trample. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens. When it attacks, you can sack a food, and if you do, you mill 3 and put a permanent card from among the milled cards into your hand. So I know where I'm putting this thing. It's going in a Myco Tyrant deck because you're going to mill, you're going to be able to get a permanent off of that deck because that deck is mostly creatures. And then you get to, crash on through with a 5/5 Trampler. And on top of that, it would work really well in a food deck, which we have a Lord of the Rings precon, Food and Fellowship, that's all about food. So this would fit in there if you don't really care about the themes of the deck. That's where another place I would stick this thing. Otherwise, it's actually an undercosted threat. For standard, I think this might see play if green decks have a resurgence. We'll see what happens there. For now, though, this is all I have for you guys. This is the last of the previews I'm going to do outside of the Commander stuff. If you like what I'm doing here, please like, comment, share, subscribe. All those things help my channel grow as I go to 1,000 subs. Right now, I'm working on an Obeka splitter of second stack, and that will be up either later today or early tomorrow morning, depending on how fast I can finish getting it edited after I get this one done. And until then, keep an eye out for it, and I will see you in the next video.